Was wrong about everything. Every single thing I thought I knew about my own family turned out to be built on sand, and it took a 10-year-old girl, one who everyone said couldn't understand the world around her, to show me just how blind I had been. My name is Gerald. I'm 69 years old. I spent 32 years as a civil engineer, building bridges across 3 states, and I always believed that if you look at something long enough, carefully enough, you can understand exactly how it works and exactly where it might fail. I was good at finding cracks before they became collapses. That was my whole career. That was who I was. I never saw the crack in my own house. My wife, Donna, passed away 6 years ago from pancreatic cancer. She went fast 3 months from diagnosis to the end, and when she left, she took something out of the center of me that I still haven't been able to name. We had one daughter together, Sandra. Sandra was 38 when her mother died, already married to a man named Derek, already living in a house about 40 minutes from mine in the same county in rural Ohio. After Donna's funeral, Sandra cried on my shoulder and told me she would always be there for me. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? For the first 2 years after Donna passed, things were fine. Sandra called regularly. She and Derek would come for Sunday dinners. Their daughter, Lily, was 4 years old then, and she used to run straight to me the second she walked through the door, arms out, calling me Grandpa before she even got her coat off. Donna had always said that Lily had her eyes. Watching that little girl grow up was the one thing that made the quiet in my house feel bearable. But when Lily was about 6, things started to change. She stopped running to me at the door. She started sitting very still at the dinner table, watching things, watching people, with this expression on her face I couldn't quite read. Sandra took her to a specialist after Lily's first-grade teacher said she seemed disengaged in class. And after 2 appointments, Sandra came to me with a serious look on her face and told me the doctor thought Lily had processing difficulties. Cognitive delays, she called it. She said Lily had trouble following conversations, trouble understanding context, trouble making sense of what was happening around her. I had no reason to doubt that. Sandra was her mother. The doctor had evaluated her. I accepted it. What I didn't understand, what I couldn't have understood then, was that Lily understood everything perfectly. Every word, every conversation, every whisper she wasn't supposed to hear. She just didn't say so. I should tell you about the house. Donna and I bought it in 1989, the year Sandra was born. 3 bedrooms, a big back porch, an old oak tree in the yard that Donna planted from a sapling. Over the decades, the neighborhood grew up around it, property values climbed, and by the time Donna died, that house was worth somewhere close to $400,000. I own it outright. No mortgage, no liens, nothing. It is the single largest asset I have in the world, and I have always planned to leave it to Sandra when I go. I told her that. I told Derek that too at a Christmas dinner 3 years ago. I said, "One day this will be yours, and I hope you'll keep the oak tree," Sandra cried. Derek shook my hand. I thought that was a moment of warmth between family. I did not realize it was the moment they started calculating. 8 months ago, I had a minor stroke. I was alone in the house, which scared me badly enough. But the neurologist told me it was small, that I'd recovered well, that with medication and some lifestyle adjustments, I could expect a normal life. Some short-term memory effects were possible, he said, some confusion on bad days, but nothing that should prevent me from living independently. Sandra was in the hospital room when he said that. She nodded and held my hand. 2 days later, she sat across from me at my own kitchen table and told me she'd been doing a lot of thinking, and that she and Derek were worried about me being alone. She said she'd spoken to another doctor, a family friend, she called him, though I didn't know who she meant, who agreed that after a stroke, my living situation needed to be reassessed. I told her I was fine. She told me she was just trying to help. That was 8 months ago. What happened 3 weeks ago, I still have to stop and breathe through before I can describe it clearly. Lily had been staying with me for the week. Sandra and Derek had gone to a medical conference in Cincinnati. Derek works in pharmaceutical sales, so conferences are part of his life, and they dropped Lily off Sunday evening with a bag, her backpack, and instructions that she needed to be in bed by 8:30. Lily was quiet when they left. She stood in my front hallway and watched their car pull out of the driveway, and she didn't move until the headlights disappeared completely. Then she turned around, looked up at me, and said, "Grandpa, I have to show you something. But you have to promise me you won't get upset before you've seen all of it." I stood there in my own hallway feeling like the floor had shifted under me. Because Lily had barely spoken to me in 2 years, she answered questions with nods. She communicated in one-word responses when pressed. Every time I tried to draw her into conversation, Sandra would interrupt and say something like, "Dad, she has a hard time with back and forth. Don't push her." And I'd stop. I'd back off. Because I didn't want to make things harder for her. "Lily," I said carefully. "Did you just—" "I've been able to talk this whole time, Grandpa," she said. "I just couldn't. Not around them." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a notebook. It was a composition book, the black and white kind. The cover soft from being handled so many times. She had filled it, I could see, almost to the last page. Her handwriting neat, careful, slightly large, the way children's handwriting is covered every line. "I started writing things down," she said, "because I was scared I would forget, and I thought if I forgot there would be no proof." I led her to the kitchen table. I sat down. She sat down across from me and placed the notebook between us. "You should read the part with the yellow tab first," she said. There was a small, yellow, sticky tab marking a page about 2/3 through. I opened to it with hands that were not entirely steady. The entry was dated 4 months ago. In Lily's careful handwriting, "Heard Mom and Dad talking after they thought I was asleep. Dad said the stroke was good timing. Mom said not to say it like that. Dad said you know what I mean. Mom said the doctor they know said 2 more episodes. He probably can't be alone anymore. Dad said then we move fast. Then the house is ours, and we handle it properly." I read it twice. Then I read the entry on the next page, dated 3 days later. Mom was on the phone. I heard her say Grandpa keeps forgetting things. The lady on the phone said what kind of things. Mom said his medications, appointments, conversations. I know that's not true. I've been there when he forgot things, and it's not like she's saying he forgot where he put his reading glasses. That's all I saw. And the entry after that. Dad brought home papers. I couldn't see all of them, but I saw the words power of attorney and cognitive assessment, and a name I didn't recognize. He put them in the lockbox in the closet, Mom said soon. Dad said we just need one more thing to go wrong, and it looks natural. I closed the notebook. I don't know how long I sat there. I became aware of Lily watching me from across the table. Very still, her hands folded in front of her the way I'd seen her sit at 100 family dinners while the adults talked over her head, while everyone assumed she wasn't following. "How long?" I asked. "How long have I been writing it down? How long have you been able to understand everything that was going on?" She looked at me with those eyes, Donna's eyes. God help me, and she said, "Always, Grandpa. I always understood. Mom told me that if I talked too much around you, it would be confusing for you. That it wasn't good for someone with your condition." She paused. "You don't have a condition, do you?" "No," I said. "I don't." She nodded slowly, like she'd known that, but needed to hear me confirm it. "I couldn't say anything in front of them," she said. "I didn't know what they would do. But I thought if I wrote it all down, and if I gave it to you when we were alone." She stopped. She looked at the notebook. "I didn't want to wait anymore. I was scared they were going to do something before I could tell you." I reached across the table and I held her hand, this 10-year-old girl who had been carrying this by herself, in silence, for months. My granddaughter, who everyone had written off as unable to comprehend the world around her, who had been comprehending everything, meticulously, with more clarity and more courage than any adult in her life. "You did the right thing," I told her. "You did exactly the right thing." Then I asked her if she'd be okay watching TV in the living room while I made some phone calls. She said yes. She said, "Call someone who can actually help, Grandpa, not just a friend." For a child of 10, she had a remarkably clear understanding of what the moment required. I called my attorney first. His name is Paul, and he's handled my affairs for 15 years, my will, the property deed, everything. I caught him at home and I apologized for the hour, and I told him I needed to speak with him urgently, that I believed there was an ongoing effort to have me declared incompetent in order to seize control of my property. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Gerald, I need you to listen to me carefully and tell me everything from the beginning." I told him everything. He told me not to touch anything in the house, that Sandra or Derek had given me any food, any supplements they'd sent home with me, anything I hadn't purchased myself. He said he'd have a colleague reach out to my neurologist in the morning to get an independent cognitive assessment scheduled as quickly as possible. He said, "The notebook is important. Don't let it out of your possession." After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long moment. Then I thought about what Paul had said, don't consume anything they'd given me. I went to the cabinet above the refrigerator where I kept vitamins and supplements. There was a bottle Sandra had dropped off about 6 weeks ago, green capsules in an amber bottle, labeled as a memory support supplement. She'd smiled when she gave it to me and said, "Derek found these. They're supposed to be great for people your age after any kind of neurological event. I had been taking 2 every morning. I put the bottle in a Ziploc bag and set it on the counter. 3 days later, Paul sent that bottle to an independent lab at the request of the private attorney he'd connected me with. It took another week for the results. The capsules contained a compound that in regular doses would cause cognitive fogginess, short-term memory disruption, and, in high enough quantities over time, could mimic the early symptoms of dementia in an otherwise healthy adult. I cannot tell you what it feels like to read a lab report like that and understand that your own daughter has been feeding you something designed to make you appear diminished. I cannot describe it in any language that would do the feeling justice. I have built bridges. I have stood on top of completed spans and felt a kind of clean pride in something solid and real. Reading that report was the opposite of that feeling. It was like standing on a bridge and watching it dissolve beneath your feet. Sandra and Derek came to pick up Lily on Saturday morning. They didn't know I knew anything. I had spoken to Paul every day that week. I had submitted to a full neurological and cognitive assessment, the independent one, and the physician had told me directly that my cognitive function was well within normal range for my age, that there was no clinical basis for any determination of incompetence, and that if I had been taking the substance in those capsules regularly, he would expect to see exactly the kind of low-grade confusion and memory slippage that Sandra had apparently been reporting to others. Paul told me there were now 3 other people involved. His colleague who specialized in elder law, my neurologist's office, and a detective from the county sheriff's office who handled financial exploitation cases involving elderly individuals. He told me not to confront Sandra directly. He told me to be patient. I am not, by nature, a patient man. But I thought of Lily sitting across that kitchen table with her hands folded and her notebook and her 10 years of watching and waiting and writing things down in silence, and I thought that if she could do it, I could manage one more Saturday morning. Sandra came through the door smiling. Derek shook my hand. They asked how Lily had been, whether she'd caused any trouble, whether my week had been all right. I said everything was fine. I poured coffee. I listened to Derek talk about the conference. I watched Sandra scan the room with those small, careful glances she doesn't think I notice. She noticed the supplement bottle was gone from the cabinet. I saw her clock its absence. Her eyes moved to my face and then away, smooth and practiced, and she said nothing. When they got up to leave, Sandra hugged me at the door and said, "Dad, I've been meaning to talk to you. Derek and I have been thinking there's a really wonderful community about 20 minutes from us. Independent living, but with support services built in. We thought maybe we could all go take a tour together, just to look." I looked at my daughter. I thought about Donna planting that oak tree in the backyard, 29 years old, dirt on her knees, laughing at something I'd said. I thought about Sandra as a little girl falling asleep in the back seat of our car on the way home from the lake. I thought about how long grief can warp a person, and whether it had warped Sandra, or whether she had always had this calculation in her somewhere and I simply hadn't had occasion to see it before. "I'll think about it," I said. She smiled and touched my cheek. They left. 6 days later, Paul called me and told me it was time. What followed was not dramatic in the way you might expect. There were no police cars with lights in my driveway, no dramatic confrontation in a public place. The sheriff's detective interviewed me for 2 hours at Paul's office. The notebook. Lily's notebook was photographed page by page and entered into the record. The lab results on the supplement capsules were submitted. My cognitive assessment was submitted. Paul's colleague had traced, through phone records Sandra hadn't thought to protect, a series of calls between Sandra and the family friend doctor, who turned out to be a physician. Derek had a long-standing business relationship with calls, in which the plan to have me assessed and declared incompetent had been discussed explicitly over a period of nearly 5 months. Derek was charged first. 2 counts of financial exploitation of an elderly person, 1 count of conspiracy. Sandra was charged 3 days later with the same, plus an additional count related to the knowing administration of a substance intended to impair. I was sitting on my back porch when Paul called to tell me. It was evening, that particular blue-gray light that comes just before dark in Ohio in the autumn, and the oak tree in the yard was losing the last of its leaves. I sat there for a long time after I hung up. I thought about all the Sunday dinners, all the times I'd held back from pushing Lily to talk because I'd been told she couldn't keep up. All the mornings I'd taken those green capsules because my daughter had smiled and told me they were good for me. I thought about what Lily had said, that she started writing things down because she was scared she would forget and there would be no proof. A 10-year-old child, bearing witness, keeping the record, trusting that if she held on to it long enough, it would matter. It mattered. The question of what happens to Lily now is not simple, and I won't pretend otherwise. She has two parents facing serious criminal charges. She has a grandfather who is healthy and present and has already spoken to Paul about the legal process for establishing guardianship. She has a pediatric counselor now, someone who specializes in children who have experienced trauma within family systems, and the counselor told me in our first meeting that Lily is, beneath everything, a remarkably grounded and resilient child. I chose not to tell the counselor that I already knew that. I figured that was Lily's story to tell when she was ready. 2 weeks ago, Lily moved into my spare bedroom. She brought her backpack and her books and 3 stuffed animals she's slightly embarrassed about but hasn't gotten rid of. On her first morsa, here she came downstairs and found me making pancakes, and she sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd opened that notebook and changed everything. And she watched me for a moment, and then she said, "Grandpa, can I help?" It was such a simple question. 4 words. But she said it in a clear, easy voice, like someone finally allowed to stop pretending, and I had to turn back to the stove for a moment before I answered. I told her she could set the table. She got up and opened the cabinet where I keep the plates, and she knew exactly where they were because she'd watched me reach for them 100 times over the years. All those years everyone thought she wasn't paying attention. She's been paying attention the whole time. Sandra and Derek are awaiting trial. Their attorneys are negotiating. I have been advised not to discuss the specifics of the charges publicly, and I won't. What I will say is that the house is still mine. The oak tree is still in the backyard, and every morning when I come downstairs, there is a 10-year-old girl at my kitchen table who talks now, freely and constantly, and has an opinion about everything from the best kind of syrup to whether the Cincinnati Bengals have a realistic shot this season, and the sound of her voice in my house is the best thing I have heard in 6 years. I used to build bridges for a living. I understood load-bearing structures, stress points, the invisible forces that hold things up or bring them down. I thought I was good at seeing where things might fail. I missed it completely, right in my own house, but Lily didn't. She saw it clearly, wrote it down carefully, and waited for the right moment, the same way a good engineer waits for the right conditions before she commits to a design. Patient, precise, certain of what the evidence shows. She is 10 years old, and she is already better at this than I ever was. If you are listening to this and you have someone in your life, a child, a neighbor, an elderly parent whom people have dismissed as unable to understand, unable to follow, unable to keep up, please stop and reconsider. The people who are told they don't understand are often the ones watching most carefully. They are the ones keeping the record. And sometimes, when the moment is exactly right, they will hand you a notebook with a yellow tab, and everything will change. I was wrong about a great many things, but I was not wrong about Donna's eyes.